All right, Briahna, inquiring minds want to know, what is on your radar?
Well, affirmative action is in the news again, with yesterday's announcement that the Supreme Court has agreed to weigh in on whether race-conscious admissions at Harvard and the University of North Carolina are constitutional. Plaintiffs argue that Asian American students are unfairly hurt by current affirmative action policies, and they're not wrong. Under a race-blind metric, it's estimated that Harvard would be about 40% Asian rather than 20%. And it's clear that high-achieving Asian American students are disadvantaged by a number of metrics. For one, a preference for geographical diversity hurts Asian American students who disproportionately hail from the coasts. A Californian of Asian descent has to compete against all the other Californians of Asian descent, while the Asian American from Manhattan, Kansas is in a field of his own. Asian American students are also disfavored when it comes to their letters of recommendation. Despite performing better than white students academically on average, Asian American students score slightly lower than white students by this metric. Moreover, 43% of white Harvard students are either legacy admits, kids from families who donated money to the school, or athletes, groups among which Asian Americans are also underrepresented. And to be clear, what drives legacy admissions is not merit. It's money. Colleges need alumni to keep filling the endowment coffers and legacy admissions by recurring donation checks. And here's the rub. While plaintiffs in this affirmative action case claim to be invested in equality for Asian American students, they take no issue with these metrics: legacy admissions, athletic admissions, recommendation letters, all of which unfairly advantage white students at Asian Americans' expense. No, the target is squarely on Black and brown students, who take up a relatively small sliver of admission space compared to the white 43%. Regardless of whether you believe diversity is a legitimate goal, and I do, it's hard to argue that mommy or daddy went here is a legitimate metric to keep qualified students out. So, what's going on here? Why the focus on Black and brown students when Asian American students and deserving white students are really being boxed out by the glut of legacy admissions and athletes? Well, the folks who brought this lawsuit on behalf of Asian American students aren't operating in good faith. In fact, it was brought by Ed Blum, an opportunistic, litigious white conservative on a personal crusade that has little to do with substantive equality goals. Asian American students have a legitimate claim, but Blum's focus on Black and brown students, ignoring low-performing white students, betrays the fact that his interests are something other than equality. He's using Asian American students to change admission standards to further benefit white students like Abigail Fisher, the young plaintiff used by Blum during his first failed anti-affirmative action crusade years ago. A woman whose basic test scores and SATs were revealed to be lower than the Black classmates whom she accused of getting an unfair leg up. But Blum's bad faith aside, what is to be done about these caps on Asian admissions? I happen to think affirmative action is a well-intentioned attempt to put a Band-Aid on a bigger problem, and it's time to stop skirting the real issue. The problem we need to address is that colleges are too hierarchical, too competitive, and the stakes of getting in are just too damn high. Isn't it a red flag that just a few years ago, several B-list celebrities went to federal prison over a college admissions bribery scandal, one that notably exploited that athlete loophole? I mean, Felicity Huffman is worth an estimated $45 million, and that's without taking into account her movie star husband's wealth. Their kid certainly didn't risk living in the street, whether he got into BU or got bupkis, so why commit fraud? Actress Lori Loughlin of Full House fame did 2 months in prison for her role in the college admission scam. Was she really worried that little Olivia Jade's life would be ruined if she didn't get into USC? The pressure to go to college is so enormous that 44 million Americans currently hold student debt at an average rate of $30,000 a pop. The debt is often issued at usurious interest rates of 7 or 8%, rates that far outstrip what homeowners can access, and without the promise of an appreciated asset at the end of it all. And before you poo-poo student debtors for having made a bad choice, remember that my entire generation was lectured repeatedly that if we didn't go to college, it would be no one's fault but our own if we ended up, quote, flipping burgers. For decades, a lack of education was used as an excuse by conservative and liberal politicians alike to justify high unemployment and wages that fail to keep up with the rate of productivity. Learn how to code was gaslighting pablum, which allowed politicians to avoid addressing very real job displacement caused by free trade policies and declining union strength. It was a lie then, and it's a lie now. But millions of us complied. We did what we were told. We trusted the experts, And as a result, my generation is the most educated yet and the first to earn less than our parents. Instead of threatening us with the prospect of fast food jobs, workers are now being shamed for not being grateful for meager fast food salaries that haven't kept up with inflation. This tweet captured the bait and switch perfectly. The year 2000, go to college, you'll be flipping burgers. 2008, what do you mean you can't find a job? Is flipping burgers too good for you? 2016, oh, you want $15 an hour for flipping burgers? Millennials are so entitled. 2001, why does no one want to flip burgers anymore? No one wants to work. It's ridiculous. The system is broken. Student debt is a crisis, one that Joe Biden could but refuses to address despite his numerous campaign promises.
I think we're going to have a second round of these checks going to people individually 6-8 weeks from now. And secondly, I propose that there are a minimum of $10,000 forgiveness per person for student loan debt, because we're putting you behind an 8 ball in a way that is just hard to overcome.
Oh, promises, campaign promises. But look, here's the important point. Even those who can afford to pay and don't need to go are infected by the toxic hierarchy that's been created by our private education system. College is no longer about having an educated workforce, competing globally, ensuring civic engagement, or even personal development. It's now too often about prestige. Prestige that is so untethered from any material need that it drove Aunt Becky to federal crime. So what to do? Well, anyone who knows me knows I feel strongly that we should cancel all student debt. Joe Biden has the authority to do so by executive order, and it would create an enormous trickle-up stimulus that would directly benefit all Americans, much more so than the corporate bailouts embedded in the American Rescue Plan. Bailouts, which constituted the largest upward transfer of wealth in American history. But student debt cancellation is just the tip of the iceberg. We also need to deal with the core problem, the cost of college. My solution? Make all college free, that's right, and consider canceling private institutions altogether. Now, this might sound nutty, but there's precedent for this. There are no private schools or universities in Finland. Even the small number of independent schools that exist there are publicly financed. None are permitted to charge tuition fees. Every Finnish person attends public school from pre-K to PhD. Finland also has no standardized tests, with the exception of a single exam taken at the end of our high school equivalent. Instead, teachers assess children based on independent standards of their own making. According to Anu Partin, author of The Nordic Theory of Everything, In Search of a Better Life, Finnish education policy is driven by the idea that every child should have the same opportunity to learn, regardless of family background, income, or geographic location. Education has been seen first and foremost not as a way to produce star performers, but as an instrument to even out social equality. And still, Finland produces stars. Finland ranks at or near the top of the PISA survey, an assessment of reading, math, and science conducted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It regularly battles it out for first place with South Korea and Singapore. If you're wondering where Americans fall with our big debt burdens and light pockets, we're middling at best. All of the competition, federal jail time, and money spent yields results that are as mediocre as Abigail Fisher's SAT scores. So maybe it's time to try something new. I personally support the diversity motive, but when college is simultaneously one of the few pathways for upward mobility and a scarce resource allotted only to the lucky few, depriving anyone of an opportunity for superficial reasons feels unethical. You should be able to attend college if you want to, even if your family is poor, even if you didn't go to a private school, even if your parents couldn't afford violin lessons and trips to Paris and SAT tutoring. Americans used to understand that education benefits society. John F. Kennedy's space race was in part about sparking an appetite for science and innovation in our young people that would enrich the entire nation. Education should not be for the privileged few. It should be a human right available to anyone who wants it. And importantly, we can afford it. Bernie Sanders and Pramila Jayapal introduced a bill to make college free that would fully pay for it with a tax on Wall Street speculation. And compare the price tag, around $50 billion a year, to the Wall Street bailout, $1 trillion, or recent COVID spending, $1.9 trillion, much of which, again, went to bail out big business. Before you get ready to argue against this, just take a moment and ask yourself why. Would you have been one of those arguing against the establishment of free K through 12 100 odd years ago? Do you not think it's more efficient to pay for young people to be in colleges than prisons? Because I'll tell you, rich folks have no problem arguing for a $185 billion SALT tax deduction, and that's doing nothing for our community. Joe Biden is proud that his kids went to Ivy League schools. The University of Pennsylvania even has a Penn Biden Center of Diplomacy named after the president, and for some reason, Penn has paid Biden more than $900,000 since he was vice president. But Biden doesn't seem to believe other people's kids should have the same opportunities unless their legacies, their parents are rich, and or they're open to living in debt for the next 20 to 30 years. And watch out, people like Biden like to use faux populist talking points about dignity for non-educated workers to justify keeping college exclusive for them. Everyone is dignified, but Yale is for their kids, not yours. And opportunists like Bloom, the affirmative action litigator, use legitimate frustrations held by parents and students who understand exactly how much a college education can be worth to divide us up. But dignity attaches because you're a human being with intrinsic value. It's not conditional. Wealth shouldn't make or break whether a kid can go to Harvard versus community college. And your life outcome shouldn't hinge on the absurd gap between how a Yale degree and a community college degree are perceived in the employment marketplace. The answer isn't to keep reshuffling the deck to make new winners and losers. The answer is to stop playing the competitive college game. Everyone should be educated in high-quality, equal, accessible institutions. The best educated countries in the world understand that education is a human right. Maybe we could learn something from them. I know I put a lot on the table there, guys.
Well, I mostly agree with what you had to say. I don't agree with the solution of making all private school public school, but no, I think you make good points about the lawsuit. I think the lawsuit is going to succeed, regardless of what one thinks about it. Affirmative action is going away, but absolutely we should. The legacy admissions, the athletic admissions are a far greater moral scandal, in fact, and they should not do those. Now it's not quite the same because they're arguing that under existing law you can't do the affirmative action is racial discrimination, so you can't do it, and there's no equivalent legal requirement that you not do.
Very curious.
But it is a horrible policy that should absolutely be gotten away with. What do you think, Kim?
I'm probably in between the two of you on this one. I mean, I'm all about canceling the student debt. I'm all about making public university free for all. I'm not so sure if I'm going to go as far as to make all private universities public. I think that's maybe where I say, well, I don't know. But one thing, Briahna, is that the real point that you're kind of hitting on with everything that you talked about is that these universities and the education system has been allowed to run amok, basically. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're allowed to. It is, and Robbie, you being the libertarian, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, but these private universities like Harvard, they're allowed to pretty much admit whoever they want, which is why they're able to do these sort of legacy admissions and athletic admissions and, favor kids of alumni. And they're also allowed to charge whatever it is they want to charge. Meanwhile, they have massive endowments. They do, and then they try to sort of soften it and give themselves a good public image by saying things like, well, if you get accepted to Harvard, you will be able to attend Harvard. We will make it work, right? They say, anyone, doesn't matter what your financial situation is, we will figure it out. You can get in.
That. They weren't saying that while I was going.
And I'm not going to defend these organizations at all.
Now.
These so-called private universities are barely even they get so much public funding. They're clearly skirting some quasi-public line where I think it is perfectly reasonable for the public to scrutinize and question their policies. So don't get me wrong there. I am not saying, oh yeah, Harvard can do whatever they want. Well, maybe they can do whatever they want if they stop taking so much federal dollars. That would be a different story.
Right. If they were purely private. I wish there was a way, though, kind of going to your Finnish example, I wish that there was a way not to make all private universities public, but instead to kind of figure out a way to convert it to the way the UK does it, where the top universities in the UK are public. So Oxford, Cambridge, College of London, those are public universities in the UK. So somehow their top tier universities are public, and it's the kids that, so you work really hard, you do what you can because you want to go to one of these top tier schools where it's not going to cost you very much money. And then if you didn't get in, then your parents, if they're rich, they can pay for you to go to some private university. And I wish that our system was a little bit more like that, where the government would actually value the minds of youth and say, we want the best and the brightest. We want to fund the best and the brightest. We want to find the best and the brightest. And we want to cultivate them and nourish them. I wish that there was a way, for our system to flip. I do want to mention, though, as far as the Asian American, as far as the lawsuit goes and the discrimination with affirmative action. I went to college a long time ago. It's been like 20 years, but I did go. As you know, I'm in California. I went to the University of California. I am half Asian, half white at the time, and this was 20 years ago. My admissions counselor guided me to not click the Asian box in my application to the university, and said that I would be better off if I claimed white, and that because they were discriminating heavily against Asians. Now, in the University of California system, whites are not the majority. Actually, Asians are. So the percentage of Asians is higher than any other racial group. And I always made the joke that, when the first day I got on the bus to go into school, I was the only white person on the bus, and I'm half Asian. Everybody else was Asian.
Well, that's exactly part of what's going on in California, is that after they got rid of some of the kind of racial quotas because of a case similar to this, what you saw was larger numbers of Asian students admitted to these schools in a way that upset a lot of white students who no longer saw themselves in majorities on campus. So I think that this is exactly the issue. The incentives that are created by the system are pretty perverse. And I agree with you. I think that we should be in a country where our best schools, our public schools, like the University of California system used to be before it was radically defunded, as, by the way, other groups started to get access to campus in the 1970s and 80s. So I appreciate you guys engaging with this panel. More rising after this.